Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to TWIGF 2026. This session will be conducted in English, addressing the topic, Contested Terrains of Global Internet Governance, Perspective of Middle Powers in Internet Governance. First, please join me in welcoming our moderator for this discussion, Enescan Lorci, Research Fellow at the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. Next, let me introduce our distinguished panelists for this session. Joining us here in the hall are Viktor Buzna, Senior Research Fellow at Hungarian Institute of International Affairs, and Dr. Müge Yüce, Associate Professor at Atatürk University and currently a Visiting Fellow at National Zhengzhi University. And joining us remotely, and who will be on the screen, we have Dr. Lin Xingxuan, Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science at National Chengkong University. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and all of our speakers to begin their session.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at TWIGF. It's my pleasure to moderate this session. As just introduced today, our session is going to focus on middle powers perspective on internet governance and also overall digital governance. And so this discussion of internet governance often develop around great power competition. Previously internet governance and now AI governance is also mainly around great power competition. And we do acknowledge that great power competition is important, but on the other hand, we feel that middle powers perspectives are also important to consider. And middle powers are not just bystanders, they also have their own national interest, and they try to navigate their own way within this internet governance and also digital governance issues. So to tackle this issue today, we have great speakers, really diverse from different parts of the world. The Viktor from Hungary, Dr. Yüce from Turkey, and also Professor Lin from Taiwan. So Viktor is going to help us understand EU's perspective, which often known as EU's digital sovereignty. And Dr. Yüce is going to talk about Turkey's digital sovereignty idea, which is by name similar to EU's approach, but when we delve into the issue, it's actually quite different than EU's perspective. And finally, Dr. Lin is going to help us understand Taiwan case, which is a really unique and important case because Taiwan is a high-tech democracy which is trying to navigate under great geopolitical pressure. So now I think we can turn to Viktor. Viktor, can you help us to understand EU's model of digital sovereignty with a general overview, how this model is similar and different from multi-stakeholder model, and also can you mention a little bit of what are the challenges that EU is facing on the way of pursuing its own path of in the digital governance? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Enescan, and thank you very much for having me here on this fantastic event. I prepared the presentation. I don't know if we can display that. Oh, okay, thank you. And probably I can use this stick to step on. All right. So luckily, basically, this presentation covers all those questions that Enescan has just raised. So I'm going to talk about the EU's position, changing position and role in the so-called multi-shareholder model, and actually, what comes after the multi-shareholder model, at least from a European perspective. So the European Union has always been actually a strong advocate for the US-led multi-shareholder model. However, in this presentation, I'm going to argue that this position is changing, is shifting. So the narrative, the discourse of the European Union is clearly changing to other focus. So basically, the multi-shareholder model that was more like introduced, at least in the academia literature, the beginning of the 21st century, in 2000s. And the European Union has always stood up as a strong supporter. However, later on, the shift occurred. First, the European Union has developed a very strong regulatory framework, especially in the technological field. And then later on, as the environmental and the domestic circumstances has changed, the European Union has started to focus on other issues, for example, digital sovereignty, strategic autonomy, resilience, and stuff like that. So what does it mean for the multi-shareholder model? Well, I will try to answer this question in my presentation. So, in general, why is this important for the European Union from a foreign policy perspective? So the European Union has long built its foreign policy agenda on setting or portraying itself as a model for other countries and for other regions as well. I would differentiate here three basic conceptual frameworks. The EU as a regulatory power, meaning that all those regulations, especially for the technological field, are being shown as an example, as a model for other countries, for other actors, not just countries, but other organizations, businesses, to follow, to comply with regulations, so they can enter the European market. So with this process, the European Union has actually gained control, leverage over other countries' digital data, internet governance. Also, the European Union is portraying itself as a normative power, at least the literature does, meaning that it's not just about legal frameworks, but it's much deeper. It's about democratic values, norms, and other actually very important things when we come to geopolitical arena where we are standing now, which is very much dominated by kind of assertive, sometimes even aggressive techno-nationalist sentiment. And so these two, the regulatory power and the normative power conceptual frameworks that was somehow included in the framework, conceptual framework of the so-called Brussels effect, which basically says that the European Union is such a great market and such an important market for other countries and other businesses and actors that they would like to comply with the European Union. So as they comply with the European Union, then they are starting to behave as the European Union or how the European Union wants them to behave. So that's the main concept of the Brussels effect. Maybe I will have to speed up a bit. But there were some issues emerged during this 20, 30 years. I would differentiate here three big problems, big issues, which are, of course, very much mutually reinforcing each other's. Technological dependence is a big issue, especially on American technology. The European Union, Europe has so far failed to come up with competitive technologies and companies that represent such competitive technologies. There's another issue, the economic competitiveness. It was highlighted by Mario Draghi in his report in 2024, which basically says that the European Union has over-regulated its own markets, making it very problematic, very difficult, and very costly, actually, for companies to comply with the European regulatory frameworks, which keeps venture capital away. And since there's no venture capital in the market, the know-how and the technology is moving outside of the European Union. And the third issue is what I have already mentioned, is the geopolitical vulnerabilities that the European Union has long been following the United States, especially in terms of foreign policy and great power rivalry, but the American foreign policy is also changing. So the European Union is somehow now trying to find its own voice and its own position in this highly volatile international system. So in general, I would say that there's this strategic imbalances. So there's the regulatory side is very, very strong in the European Union. It has benefits. There was a good strategy that was built on this regulatory framework, what I have mentioned earlier, the regulatory normative power Europe and the Brussels effect, but it has gone way too far. So now, the industry, on the industrial side and the technological side is much weaker. So it should be rebalanced, and it's very difficult to rebalance it. because the environment outside the European Union is also changing to a less preferable direction. As I mentioned, great power rivalry, techno-nationalist sentiment, and the rapidly changing American foreign policy towards the European Union. So, but there are of course there's big discussion how to get over this contradictory situation. One important thing is what we are now talking about is how to engage more with middle powers and less with great powers. And the European Union is, I think, doing a lot in this, and is, I think, quite effective in this, meaning that the EU is seeking partnerships, dialogues with other middle powers or small powers or small states, especially actually in East Asia. So, the EU-Taiwan relationship, I think it's a very interesting case, but also EU-Japan, EU-Brazil now. So the European Union is really pushing this forward to build these technological-based cooperation and cross-border data flow agreements with other smaller countries. So, at the end of my presentation, what we have now, of course, we have this contradiction in the European Union's position that on the one hand, it is built its foreign policy strategy very much on regulations and exporting its governance models to other countries and other regions. But unfortunately, it has proved not to be enough. Moreover, it has started to harm its own market and its own enterprises. So it has now found itself in this contradictory situation, how to handle with great powers, especially the United States of America, how to handle the multi-shareholder model, which is apparently means a lot different for the US itself. So, probably the European Union is able to come up with its own model of the multi-shareholder model, like multi-shareholder model 2.0, meaning it is the shareholders are actually much more middle powers and less great powers, or at least the middle power shareholders have a stronger voice in this model than great powers. But it first has to come through its own obstacles and then developing its own position in the international system. So that was it for my introduction, and I'm happy to answer questions later on.
Thanks so much, Viktor. So now we can, I think, turn to Dr. Yüce. So Dr. Yüce, after we just listened to Viktor's presentation about EU's digital sovereignty model, which is mainly based on regulations, and these regulations often emphasize on privacy, users' rights, and democratic values. So can you help us to understand what is Turkey's perspective? So can you give us a little bit of overview of Turkey's perspective on internet governance and also this digital governance? And also, we know that Turkey's perspective is mainly focusing on national security. It's a pragmatic and sovereignty-based approach. But this term of national security is really tricky. So it can be often used as the way of justifying a government control and also like the authoritarian policies. So how do you think Turkey is navigating this balance in between like the ensuring national security, but on the other hand, respecting freedom of speech online? So yeah, floor is yours. Thank you.
Dear Dr. Lorci, thank you for organizing this panel and inviting me this session. I have also a presentation. Could you please? Yes. Hello, everybody. I am Müge Yüce, and I am coming from Turkey. Currently, I'm a MOFA Taiwan Fellow at NCCU, and today I will present Turkish position and policies on internet governance. And my title is Between Digital Sovereignty and Global Connectivity, Turkey's Internet Governance as a Middle Power. Here is my outline. I will touch a bit first Turkey as an emerging middle power amid regional and global shifts. And then I will talk main pillars of digital sovereignty for Turkey. What does digital sovereignty means for Turkish policymakers? And then what Turkish policymakers use, which instruments they use to govern this space, and then we will talk about the implications. But first, I would like to start with what is going on the Middle East and the borders of Turkey. Especially after Arab Spring, Turkey is facing with the regional turmoil and massive migration from its neighbors. So, especially after Syrian war, Russia-Ukraine war, and Israel-Iran conflicts, all these regional conflicts affected so much Turkey and Turkey's internal policies and the national security perceptions. So after 4 million immigration and refugees accepted from Turkey, Turkish internal polarization, social polarization is increasing. And the inflation rate is really high, up to 70% right now. So our President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is changed the regime from parliamentary democracy to a Turkish-style presidency. So therefore, it is actually a hyper-presidency. But traditionally, Turkey has a strong commitment to European Union membership, and we are a modern, secular, but Muslim majority country. But nowadays, there is a big transformation in Turkish foreign policy and Turkish approach to the world. So therefore, because United States and the European Union doesn't understand and doesn't respect Turkish sensitivities along its borders, Turkish and its Western allies has conflicted interests. Therefore, we can easily say that Turkey has been marginalizing by its traditional allies. So therefore, Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that if United States doesn't understand us, then we have to find new friends. We will seek new friendship and new allies. This approach totally impacts and shapes the digital policies of Turkish government right now. As I mentioned just before, traditionally, Turkey is a strategic ally of NATO and strong ties with European Union and European markets. But after 2010s, because of the regional and global turbulence, Turkey trying to increase its strategic autonomy and seeking for some mediation initiatives. And especially during the Russia-Ukraine war, Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Turkey initiated Black Sea Grain Corridor, which is very important for the grain export and import globally. And also, we are trying to mediate Israel-Gaza conflict. And because of these conflicts, Turkey is nowadays say that the new regional order cannot be established without Turkey. So therefore, Turkey is categorized as a regional middle power, regional leaders, something like that. But after the 2016, Turkey is slowly leaving from the European Union and Western allies and increasingly come closer to Eastern powers like Russia, China, BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So Turkish foreign and internal policy now can be categorized as a strategic balancing and strategic autonomy. So what does digital sovereignty means for Turkey is Turkish digital sovereignty built around three core pillars that distinguish Turkish view. First of all is Turkey approaches digital sovereignty as national security. So because of these regional conflicts, Turkey increasingly securitize all the sphere of politics. And digital sovereignty and internet space is at the top of the agenda. And then the second one is responsible regulation plus user protection. And then the third one, contribution to global norms as a bridge. The core belief, Turkish perspective towards digital sovereignty is that the internet is not a borderless common, but more than this, and it is a domain of state power, foreign interference, and information warfare. So digital sovereignty can be categorized as the one of the elements of national security and national defense argument. So the instrument Turkey used to govern this space is law number 5651 and 2025 cybersecurity law and 2026 AI strategy. Law number 5651, according to this law, social network providers in Turkey must appoint a local representative, store user data in Turkey, and comply with 48-hour content removal or face fines up to 3%. And 2025 cybersecurity law. Under this law, Turkey creates a cybersecurity office under the presidency. The Turkish presidency has a broad data access powers for national security reasons, and they increasingly criminalizes spreading false information about data leaks. But they don't explain what is the false information about data leaks. And the last one, linked to 2026 AI strategy. According to this strategy, digital autonomy is explicitly framed as an indispensable from defense and state capacity, indigenous AI, cloud infrastructure, and the ethical governance. And the second main pillar of Turkish digital sovereignty approach is responsible regulation and user protection. Turkey enforces swift takedowns for threats to public order, national security, and children. Especially 2026 proposal for age verification and under 15 social media bans. Nowadays, we every day hear that Turkish government decided to suspend some of social media accounts because of the threat to public order. And we still have not any information what is threat to public order and what does public order means. Here is a report published by Freedom of the Net 2025. According to this report, Turkey is among the 5 countries with the steepest long-term declines in internet freedom, and Turkey is categorized as not freedom country. And this report gave Turkey a score of 31 out of 100. So therefore, Turkey is in the bottom line of 72 countries evaluated. Even though these restrictions, Turkey has advanced e-government, and this shows it can regulate while delivering digital public services. And Turkey demonstrates that sovereignty and innovation are compatible, platforms adopt local tech growth, and citizens get both security and connectivity by states. However, Turkey doesn't reject multi-stakeholderism outright, and it insists government must have a seat at the table on sovereignty, data flows, and security. And Turkey's voice aligns with emerging market realities, and this is that rules must reflect diverse state capacities, not just liberal democracy assumptions. So, according to Turkish policymakers and Turkish elites, academics, they argue that Turkish model can be a regional leadership model, like for Turkic states, Balkans, Middle East, and other middle powers seeking autonomy without full authoritarian control. So Turkish model can be used, they argue that. So for conclusion, we can say that Turkey is reshaping its official discourses on national security and focusing on self-dependence on national defense, new technologies, and AI, and trying to strategically balance competing Asian and Western norms. And we are trying to find a new identity and a new position in the transforming global order. That is Turkish approach from my point of view, Dr. Lorci. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I think that was a great explanation. So now I think we can turn to Dr. Lin. She's joining us online. She's a professor at National Cheng Kung University in Tainan. So can she hear us? No? Okay. Okay. So Dr. Lin, until now we discussed EU's perspective and Turkey's perspective, which these two sounds really, like different each other. So EU's perspective is based on regulations, users' rights, the privacy, and somehow commitment to democratic values. On the other hand, we had Turkey's perspective, which is focusing on national security, and it seems like national security is also used as a way of controlling people online. So I think Taiwan is a really interesting and unique case that we can see both of the elements from both of this governance model exist in Taiwan case. Taiwan is a strong democracy and it's a high-tech democracy, but on the other hand, there are great geopolitical pressure on Taiwan. So considering this, can you give us a little bit of overview that what is Taiwan's perspective on internet governance? And also, can you help us to understand, despite this, the geopolitical tension and also the risks, how Taiwan actually can balance to be a democratic country, but on the other hand, like to have a resilient cyberspace. Thank you.
Okay, I will. Thank you so much for moderator Lorci and the professors Müge and Dr. Buzna, and thank you all the panelists, and thank you so much for Lorci for organizing this distinguished panel talking about and focusing on the contesting discussion of the global internet governments, particularly focus on the middle powers such as the Hungary and the Turkey, including Taiwan, as well as how to what extent how Taiwan can respond to this geopolitical pressure. So I think that in the following, I will focusing on the several part and section. And first of all, I will just go back and to trace back a little bit about the conceptualization of the digital sovereignty and how will we narrative and how do we interpret the digital sovereignty itself. And also, I will move on to the three majors and the representative iconic digital empires, including, as the Buzna already introduced, the EU strategy, as well as the US strategy, also corresponding, including the China model, and try to figure out this to what extent that Taiwan can respond to this geopolitical dynamic. Yeah, when it's reflecting into the domain, the digital domain, I think the sovereignty itself, the normative narrative of the sovereignty itself should be interpreted into three categorizations, which are trying to define and classify into three kind of the conception, which is the cyber sovereignty, trying to focusing on the domestically digital public spheres, also emphasizing and facilitating the control of the domestic digital information domain. And then the second conception I would like to emphasize is the digital sovereignty, which also the topic and agendas in today's panels is about to what extent a company or the state or the model jurisdiction can adopt an autonomous position and reduce its dependence on other countries. But also this leading to my third conception of the data sovereignty, which I think we should be respectively understand this differently and respectively. It's also referring to what extent the retention of the data should be controlled over by each state or each country itself. So I think that's sovereignty, the digital sovereignty might be a macro conceptualizations and also can be break into pieces of these three kind of the conception. And next page, please. So this also leading to some theoretical discussion about the digital sovereignty because it is so much interchangeable and sophisticated conception. Also have a lot of the confusions and this contested and debated conceptualization of what actually the digital sovereignty is. So a lot of the scholars also provided somehow more or less literature trying to focusing on the major models that's currently around the world. They're trying to classify and categorize that into three kinds of the major models, what we can rename as the right basis or right-driven model, and also the market-oriented model and the centralized model like China. So this is also the chart and try to vividly illustrate it. Regardless of which models you adopted, you might focusing on several key strategy and the key approaches and policy is that we can see from the slide illustrating that regardless of which models you adopting, that's supporting the domestic cooperation, also the stimulating the digital innovation is all the key policy and approaches that each jurisdiction have been put emphasis on. And also as well, this also can see from this chart vividly illustrated that extracting the control over the public and private data as well as the digitalization of the public administrative and also cooperative process. And also finally, I want to focusing is and try to highlight is the enhancing the defense. Also echo the Professor Müge's point of view is that enhancing the national defenses against the cybercrime or the domestic and also international or external threat is also as important as each models have been adopted and emphasized on. Next page, please. So that also can projecting axis, coordinate axis is trying to illustrate it and demonstrate it. That different countries also already adopted somehow their strategic deployment toward the digital sovereignty. So from this axis, we can vividly just have some get ideas that you can see from the right-hand side, and the North Korea and the China already have been categorized and subjected to digital sovereignty models that incline to the geopolitical cooperation as well as the hard regulations, which also as well as state basis and state-driven model in terms of the digital sovereignty. But also in the right-hand side is about somehow the democracy in East Asia, including the Japan or South Korea, have been fall within the category of the market-driven, but also they pay attention and cautions about the geopolitical balance and the geopolitical imbalance in this whole picture and overarching geopolitical deployment. And also we can see in the left-hand side is the EU, also the Switzerland, and also some, as well as some countries like New Zealand have been categorized and subjected to domestic state control, also much more likely to the right basis model. So I also want to lead into our primary and major topic of today is that to what extent Taiwan should be responsive to all these different kind and different distinctive models and the paradigm of the digital sovereignty. Next page, please. So we can see that also right basis models have some scholars discussion. Next page. So already have some literatures. Let's focusing on the right-based models. If you identify yourself as a right-based model paradigm, what kind of the strategic you're going to adopt it? There's also have already some academic literatures that been pointing out, like the goal you need to set up trying to view in the digital the rights. You need to put emphasis of the digital right and just guarantee and ensure the citizenship digital rights can be guaranteed, and also has some core value and the role of the state. Next page, please. And also leading to how will you protect in the vulnerable groups that we can see there's the representative and iconic examples of the right basis and right driven model and paradigm is the EU, that the promulgation of the DSA and the DMA as well as the EU AIA is all the reflecting some sort of emphasis on the highlight of the digital rights and the protection of the EU citizenship. And also next page, please. So also that leading to the strict regulation, because we know that the EU law and the EU regulation directive impose a lot of stringent and restricted regulation on the control of the digital market and the digital governments. So this is the strategic probably you're going to think about, you're going to lean into the right-based models. There's some approaches and the solution that you're going to put and incorporate it into your national strategic deployment. And the second model I'm going to introduce is probably the representative one, is the US models that have been on behalf of the market-oriented model. But also we know that's different, that's oriented in the market central models like the U.S. It also have some strategic transition and transformation recently. In the recent year, next page, please. So we can see that even though that the U.S. have been long-standing categorized as a market-oriented models, but it's some case study that is also can be illuminated that the U.S. restriction on the TikTok, the ban and the restriction on the access of the TikTok, and also the EU and the UK also have some policy and regulations trying to prohibit Huawei, like from participating in 5G infrastructures, information infrastructure developments, and so on. So that market-oriented model has also been going through some long-standing and transitions based on the geopolitical dynamic. That is which I think that is interesting to share. And the next one is probably focusing on the state-basis models. Is that probably the iconic one is the next page, please, is probably the China. So this China is the iconic cases trying to represent it in state-basis models. So including the smart regulation, data advantage, also the core security philosophy that we can see the top-down secularization of all of the data and the control of the online platform and the restriction on the data flow has also been iconic strategic deployments adopted by the state or as well as the centralized digital sovereignty model. So finally, next page, I'm going to use this kind of overarching big picture of the different digital sovereignty models paradigm. We already identified that already existing at least 3 paradigms regarding how would you like to incorporate some sort of the digital sovereignty and as well as the corresponding policy and the regulatory approaches. That I think that is time, and it is time and challenging for us to think about as the middle power, as Taiwan. How will we respond in this geopolitical pressure and the geopolitical dynamic is the problematic and the key issue and essential issue to be responses. So I'm trying to next page. I'm trying to propose some sort of ideas about the resilience governments. Next page, please. It's about the resilience governments. It's also already proposed by our public agency, also the multi-stakeholders group in the internet community, trying to facilitate and enhance the resilience governments. That is trying to emphasize the ability of the public sectors and also the public and private cooperation and partnership is also essential to improve and facilitate the resilience governments that will be requiring much more multi-stakeholders and flexible and maintaining the long-standing stability in this unpredictable and geopolitical long-standing and ever-changing landscape, which I think that is the key question that Taiwan should be effectively responds and think about and considers those. Then it goes to my final some policy advocate about the 5 strategy for achieving the resilience government in Taiwan. And I also think that's already identified the 3 paradigm of the digital sovereignty. I think this is very timing and moments for us to think about what kind of the paradigm or to what extent we should incorporate it or balance or leverage and or trade-off this different kind of the interest and as well as the strategic policy in Taiwan. So I'm trying to propose 5 strategy. One is that I think that Taiwan is it's necessary for us to think about the regulatory approaches. That is to say that which approach is the right basis and the state basis or the market oriented, you're going to adopt it. I think this is the major strategic milestone we need to achieve at first. And finally, we need to guarantee. Secondly, I think we need to try to guarantee the infrastructure resilience and the stability, particularly for the informational infrastructure. And also, we need to think about the strategic deployment of the AI governments. Also, I know that the Ministry of the Digital Affairs already adopted risk basis and also have the kind of the sophisticated and well-established solid administrative governance and administrative law or the regulation trying to incorporate the right basis regulation, which I think we need to keep moving on and keep moving forward. And the fourth one is the modernization of the digital service, like as we see that even regardless of which models you adopted, like I show and illustrated previously, you need to improving your public digital service as possible as you could. So this is no matter and regardless of which models you're going to put emphasis on. And finally, is trying to build up and establish the infrastructure mechanism, which means that facilitating a multi-stakeholder strategy and trying to put in and bring in much more dialogue and multi-stakeholders discussions like I think this distinguished panel is a good starting point for us to bring in much more multi-dimensional and diverse and inclusive point of view toward a much more resilient governance of the digital sovereignty in Taiwan. So finally, I apologize some technical problem, and I really appreciate that you're listening, and thank you so much for your attention. And I also appreciate any kind of the feedback and the comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Lin. So I think today we had three presentations, and thanks to all our speakers. And this presentation highlighted the diverse ways that how middle powers think of like the democratic values, sovereignty, and national security in digital domain. Of course, this is an important issue, and 1 hour will not be enough to cover all the aspects. But I think it was still important to discuss the perspective of middle powers in such a setting, such as TWIGF. It's important to talk this issue in this platform, and thank you so much for TWIGF for giving us opportunity. So I think we still got some time for questions. So if you have any question, please approach the microphone and you can raise your question.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. So I'm an IT professional from France and Hungary. So I've been working on compliance issues with GDPR, and I understood how important is it to invite technical experts to implement the regulation, because there is a high-level regulation and you have technical details that you can adjust. And so my question would be for you is that what mechanisms or what institutional background do you think would be useful to integrate technical experts in this discussion?
Victor, do you want to?
Well, certainly, yeah. The voice of technical experts is kind of missing from this discussion. Most of these discussions, whenever I attend these panels, conferences, yeah, it's usually social scientists like myself and lawyers, even worse probably. But unfortunately, yeah, the IT is not very much represented. As far as I know, the European Union has, but maybe you have actually more experiences on this. But as far as I know, the safe harbor approach, the sandbox approach. So the European Union has came up with these institutional, yeah, frameworks in order to invite businesses, IT professionals, and others to support the regulatory process. My personal my personal opinion is, or my concern, I would say rather, my concern is that usually, these institutional frameworks, especially when it comes to the European Union, everything slows down very much. So that's the point. Regulation makes things very slow, and on the other side, technological development is becoming faster and faster. So it's always, the EU is always behind, 1 or 2 steps behind the actual technological developments. So it tries to regulate existing technologies while it doesn't really, or I'm not sure, I'm not convinced whether EU policymakers know what those technological advancements are going to be.
Perhaps we can get one more question, yeah.
I try to, give other person have a chance. Well, we actually talking about a multi-stakeholder, but when the multi-stakeholder model actually in a many different layer. But for example, in the EU, you have all the different delegate in the EU system. But there is a government. There basically is a government dialogue. And can we call this is a multi-stakeholder? Second of all, when we're down to the nation, well, at least in Taiwan, we try to talking about a multi-stakeholder, but to be the government regulation or policy defined, well, not easy, because of the practice of the government, they just are not really. I think they don't know how the process can go to approach the multi-stakeholder. The people keep talking about multi-stakeholder. It's success in the ICANN because that is a historical reason. I think most of you know that. But if you try to apply the multi-stakeholder model to like a sovereignty, to the regulation, and hopefully we're looking more dialogue between the government and private sector, civil society, and the individual. But we find it's very difficult. And Europe, I think at least from my experience, for example, the Eurodic, in the Europe, you have a European dialogue of internet governance. You can see that is a platform there. They can participate and talk. But how the multi-stakeholder really can go into the sovereignty, I think that is my question.
Yeah, thanks so much for your questions. I actually agree with your point of view, and I think that's an increasing discussion within academic literature also, that multi-stakeholder concept is actually outdated. Like the fact that the system is multi-stakeholder, it doesn't mean like all those stakes has same kind of voices, right? Like just because of civil society organizations like around the table, it doesn't mean like they actually have actual voices for the decision that made. So I think, yeah, that's a real discussion, and perhaps we need to go back these fundamental terms and start questioning that, like how we actually need to approach this topic, like from the beginning, and we should maybe start writing these concepts again, especially now the AI governance is becoming more and more important. But I think like that is something that those holders also be willing to do. I think now the problem with this, that the civil society organization, they're like really prone to support multi-stakeholder model because I think they feel like at least we have a seat on this table. But for the sovereignty models, like maybe our voices will not be matter at all. So I think these holders themselves needs to also be advocating to change these settings also within this the whole system. that being said, it looks like we are already exiting our time. So thank you so much for joining our session and listening. And thank you so much for our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of the moderator and the speaker, and also especially Professor Ling, who joined us online. Okay, so this concludes all of our session in the morning of the TWIGF 2026. Oh, would you like to have a picture in the end with Professor Ling online?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Maybe move next to the screen of the Professor Ling. Smile. One more. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so now